Hey everybody, Alex Miller at Capnion here. I'd like to talk a little bit today about how the Federal Reserve's policy tools actually work. And I'd like to do this in order to explain a little bit why we might be in a bit of a pickle right now. I think this is easier to do if you get into the details of, the Fed is raising and lowering interest rates. What does this mean? How is it actually accomplished? It is with a little bit of reluctance I joined the ranks of old men grumbling about the Federal Reserve. And then also, this is not my core competency, so I really do hope they know better than I do what they are doing. All right, so at the height of the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion, some of it kind of superficial and memes about Jerome Powell's money printer. It is not actually the case that lots of money was being printed and dumped out of a helicopter or something like that, but this refers to a real fact. So what actually happens that we call the money printer? The Federal Reserve operates by buying and selling assets, mostly the debt of the U.S. federal government. The Federal Reserve is, of course, the top banking regulator. It has some special powers. Money in 2022 is really just a bunch of numbers in computers at banks. And when the Federal Reserve buys an asset from a bank, it's essentially saying, give me this asset, and then you're allowed to change the number in your computer as if I had paid you a bunch of money. The Federal Reserve doesn't really have to have the money. It can sort of do this by fiat. And so while it's not literally printing money, it's increasing the total amount of money in existence by essentially conjuring the money that goes on the ledger at this bank when it buys assets. So what's with this story of raising and lowering interest rates? The Fed's older policy tool, and the main policy tool of a lot of central banks for a long time, is that it's going to buy and sell short-term government debt in order to manipulate the interest rates that banks lend to each other overnight. So, for example, if the Fed wants the interest rate to go down, it's going to buy a bunch of short-term government debt from banks. It's essentially conjuring the money to do this out of nothing, so it's increasing the total amount of money in circulation. The interest rate is kind of like the price of money, so if the Fed does enough of this, it's going to change the interest rate because there's just a lot more money chasing fewer people that want to borrow it. So this technique is very old and well-traveled. If you look at interest rates over time, they've been going down and down and down and down. And actually the last 20 years is a little bit weird. Like where can we go from here? There's been some talk about negative interest rates. That's a whole other video. Anyway, it was tested out in Japan when they had their kind of doldrum 90s, and then adapted here. When interest rates are sort of super low, what do? There's this other technique called quantitative easing. And the idea of quantitative easing is that you've already bottomed out your short-term interest rates by buying too much short-term government debt, and you want to stimulate the economy even more. What do? Well, you could just start buying long-term government debt and just, do a whole bunch of it. And this is another way, once again, you're conjuring this money out of nothing. It's another way to put more money into the economy and hopefully stimulate economic activity. Now, one danger of QE is that it's pretty new. There was a lot of discussion when we did in 2008 what's wrong with it, and I'm going to argue here that one problem with it is it's just new, and there's not a lot of history about how to use it. And if you've ever heard about the taper tantrum, or generally heard conversation about taper recently, the Fed goes on this QE binge of buying all these long-term bonds, and it continues to do it over a period of time. And everybody who's got these bonds is used to there being this essentially like giant sucker with unlimited money that you can sell these bonds. And then when you start to slow down buying them, everybody freaks out and there's a bunch of financial problems. And this roughly happened in 2013, and they're anxious about it happening now. And so there's not, once again, this is something that was tried for the first time in Japan in the 90s. So that one adventure is the experience we have in the United States doing it. Here's the kind of danger of where we are now. we went crazy hard trying to, print a lot of money, by which I mean we had the Federal Reserve buy tons and tons of bonds to try to get interest rates down and put more money in the economy. And so we both had our short-term interest rates super low, and then we were doing a ton of quantitative easing. We're now about to go into a period where we might be trying to raise interest rates again while we are not done with our program of continuing to buy more bonds. So it's very likely the Fed will raise interest rates to some degree in its next meeting. And so once again, it's trying to take cash out of the economy by selling the short-term government bonds that are on its books. But because they're a little bit afraid of this taper thing, they're probably still going to be to some degree buying long-term government bonds in order to put more money into the economy. And if this sounds a little weird, like the Fed is fighting itself, that's absolutely the case. It's of course important here that buying one kind of bond or the other actually makes some kind of difference in terms of what interest rates different actors in the economy see. But at the same time, if you're just talking about the total amount of money printed, we're going to be trying to get some of that money back out of circulation, even as we have a different program designed to dump lots of money into the economy that we may keep going for a while. And it's unclear how these things are going to balance out, but certainly not an ideal situation. And then I think, in my opinion, the most dangerous thing about QE is it just gives you a two-dimensional axis of decisions you have to make, and there's not a lot of history about how to handle one of the axes, and there's just more space to fuck it up, and that's the risk we're looking at right now.